Rob, we have to talk about pizza seasoning.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, if longtime listeners may know that we had a conversation. I don't even remember when we had this conversation about pizza seasoning, but it was probably last winter, maybe, I want to say.
Yeah, something like that.
But this was a pizza seasoning that you told me about that you can get in the UK that you cannot get here in the US. And when I was in London for the Relay 10th anniversary show, as were you kindly brought me a little bottle of this pizza seasoning. And I didn't talk about it last week because I hadn't had an opportunity to try it yet, but I have tried it now, and it's excellent. It's very good pizza seasoning.
Yeah, it's funny, actually, that I don't remember the conversation we had either. All I know is that about 3 weeks before the Relay show, I had a reminder that said, order John pizza seasoning. And that's what I remembered. I was like, oh yeah, I said I was going to get him some, and it was a good excuse for me to order some more as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I tried it on pizza, as you do. I mean, but obviously you told me it goes well with eggs as well. I've not tried it with eggs yet, but yeah, I think I might have sprinkled it on something. Oh, I think I maybe had it on a little pasta one night just to see. And it was quite good.
Yeah, it's a nice, it's not anything particularly fancy. If you look at the ingredients, these are all fairly common.
It's like oregano.
Now, but
I think it's like oregano and garlic and kind of your typical Italian seasonings, I guess, all mixed together. But I don't know. There's something about it. It's particularly good blend of that stuff. I guess you'll have to put a link in the show notes. I forget the name of it. It's all I have in our notes is pizza seasoning. But
no, so let me be very clear. It's pizza the action. So like
pizza the action.
So it's like a piece of the action, and it has a little what do you call it? Like a clapper board that people use to make movies.
Do you think people sprinkle it on popcorn? Maybe. I could see it. I could see it. I could see people doing that. It might be good. I don't know. I haven't really.
Yeah.
People put candy in their popcorn. Why not?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I say, I've put it on a bunch of stuff. I mean, I had it not 45 minutes ago on a pizza. So.
Oh, there you go. I had a little leftover pizza for lunch myself today. I guess it's a pizza day. I put a little pizza seasoning on mine too.
Nice. I've got something that, firstly, the color of this is not natural. I'm not sure we should be drinking this, but
probably not good for you. It's probably not, it's probably your insides are probably now dyed.
So this is Electric Pepsi. I think it might also be called Electric Pepsi Blue.
Yeah, it's very blue. I think people who are listening ought to think about the liquid you put in for your windshield wipers on your car. It's kind of that color.
Oh, it's exactly that color, yeah. And it's not entirely clear to me. It doesn't appear, or it certainly doesn't taste anything like Pepsi. This is, I think Pepsi is purely the branding. Like this is I'm not even sure what the flavor is. It's like that weird artificial blueberry type flavor.
Yeah.
I did enjoy it. The first bit, I was like, this is a really weird taste, but actually I kind of enjoyed the bottle that I bought. But yeah, it's very blue. I feel like there's something unsettling about seeing the color of it. Like I'd prefer the bottle to not be clear. I don't want to see the color of the drinks that I'm drinking sometimes.
I'm guessing that people buy this and they mix it with alcohol for a good mixer, and that you get like some fancy electric blue cocktails out of this stuff. That's just my guess.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, a little vodka in there, a little gin. I don't know what you put in it. Vodka, probably.
Vodka, I think, would go well with it. I don't really drink. I certainly don't drink cocktails very often, but I think you're right. I think with some vodka, this would be, it would be perfect for that.
Yeah, no, that does sound good. All right. Well, I haven't tried Electric Pepsi. I've seen a lot of blue drinks around here. Obviously, Mountain Dew is always doing some kind of weird color. So I'm sure they've done blue recently too, but generally stay away from the blue drinks myself.
Yeah. I mean, Mountain Dew they're like the king of weird colors.
Yes, weird colors, exclusive flavors. That's a big thing in the soda world. We've been sticking mainly to chips lately, but drinks are another whole nother category right there that I don't think we've explored it enough. Maybe I need to go. There is a place nearby here called oh, what is it called? I forget. It's a convenience store. We live near an exit to the highway. And as a result, there are a couple of gas stations right off the highway. And because people are traveling through, and stopping for gas on longer trips, there are these gas stations with a lot of snacks. So whenever I need to really find something good for Ruminate, I hit one of those places.
Yeah, no,
Hungry Hugo's is the name of the Hungry Hugo's, I think is what it's called.
That's incredible. What an amazing name.
Yeah, it's a chain apparently. I had never heard of it until I moved here. But anyway, there's that. I do have a chip to share with everyone, which is the Carolina Cozumel jalapeno queso potato chip. And that's kind of a mouthful. Cozumel obviously is a place in Mexico. Jalapeno queso, quite good, these chips. They're kettle chips. The case, it's a really nice balance between the spiciness and the cheesiness. That neither one of them really overwhelms the chip, and I've enjoyed them. I mean, a lot of these chips I've bought for the show haven't really lasted. I've had to get rid of them in one way or another, or I've suffered through them. And these I really enjoyed and would buy again. Carolina brand is a regional brand that's made here in North Carolina, but if anyone ever has, Carolina chips come in all sorts of flavors. This was one of the more out there flavors that they have, but their chips are quite good. I've had them a few times in various sandwich shops and other things. So if you ever see them, they're worth checking out.
Yeah, I'm reading the description of these, and I feel like this is like a bag of crisps designed specifically for me. Like, this is just everything I want in a flavor of crisp, definitely. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get these in the UK, but I'm certainly going to keep my eye out.
It would probably cost you dearly to import them. There's maybe a place that would mail them to you, but I have real-time follow-up here, Rob, right now.
Go on.
I got the name wrong. It's Handy Hugo's. It's even better, the name. And Handy is spelled HAN-DEE. So it's Handy Hugo's.
Sure.
And Handy Hugo's, you can get some gas. My son tells me they have the best monster drinks of any convenience store in our area. And I don't know, they have a lot of other stuff too, but I haven't been there in quite a while. It's a little bit of a hike from my place. Yeah,
this is certainly an interesting website.
Did you find their website? Very good.
I found their website. North Carolina's source for fuel, snacks, and more since 1980.
There you go.
110 convenience stores across central and eastern parts of the state. So there you go.
That's the one. That's the one right there.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Right.
We're going to talk about the App Store, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, we can talk about the App Store. I've been thinking about this because, I don't know, I kind of feel like the App Store is both the thing that propelled Apple forward and is going to be its undoing at the end of the day. And mostly I just was, I mean, we don't have to get into all the details of everything that's going on, but there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. There's the stuff about linking out and the new feeds that are associated with that. There's the whole thing with Patreon, which I find particularly disappointing that Apple's, and that's what really, I guess, led me to thinking about Apple is now becoming the gatekeeper of everything that flows through your phone. They're trying to be, at least. And, it really just started as, this has always been a thing and always been a problem for developers. A lot of developers have argued, I think quite rightly, that they don't get enough out of the App Store to justify the 30% fee. And there's been some chipping away at that fee in terms of how much people have to pay, depending on how big their business is and, what kind of subscription they're doing, all sorts of things. But it's still a lot. And this has really expanded outward to encompass all kinds of things. I mean, obviously, the Patreon thing is reaching further, that it reaches beyond developers, because really what Apple's trying to do is they're not charging. I mean, I guess technically maybe they're charging Patreon for the creator money that is the signups that happen through their app on the App Store. for memberships with creators. But really what they're doing is they're reaching into the creators' pockets ultimately. And that is obviously far beyond the developers' pockets. And it's expanded to things like now you've got, I don't know, it's expanded to a degree to things like podcasts. I mean, now, Apple's got its own podcast subscription service now, and they want 30% from that. And you can get that on the web. But, one of the things that was kind of interesting is like after we wrote about that, the fact that you can get Apple Podcasts on the web, somebody asked me, I don't see any of my shows that I've subscribed to from Mac Stories or from Relay. And I said, well, they're not there. The ones that the subscription app podcasts that show up are only the ones that Apple offers. And I think I know from a technical reason why that is, but I think that's not a great user experience. I think from a technical standpoint, the answer is if you've got a dedicated URL that's unique to you for a show that we offer at Mac Stories or, someone like Relay does, and that's available on the web, suddenly you have a shareable link that anybody can kind of glom off of your subscription. And because, Apple obviously doesn't have control over the membership end of that equation. So, I mean, I think it makes sense they didn't do it, but it does kind of make that a less than ideal solution for people who are willing to pay creators, but outside of the Apple system. And maybe that pushes more people to offer subscriptions through Apple. I don't know. We did it for a while with Mac Stories and didn't really find it to be a good experience. So we quit it because the 30% was just too much. We were actually charging more to make up some of that 30%. When we were offering them through Apple, because there are actually people who would rather pay more and be billed through Apple than to be billed by us, which, to each his own. I mean, I get that, but it wasn't enough people for it to really make a difference. And it just kind of confused the messaging about where to get, subscription podcasts. So we ended up dumping it. And I think like one person complained. So it wasn't that big a deal. But my point kind of is that, you've got, Apple tried to kind of corner the books market and got in trouble for antitrust with that. And that was probably their first run-in with regulators many years ago now when they were trying to raise the prices. And got podcasts, you got the App Store, you got the App Store expanding out to services offered through the App Store, even if they're not directly the developer, whether it's digital, whether it's physical goods, whatever it happens to be. And it's kind of becoming a lot because, obviously a lot goes through the phone, but not all of that is stuff that Apple adds any value to.
Yeah, this all of this stuff, the Patreon and, all these different things that they're trying to do to just skim a tiny little bit more money off of whatever it is they think they can get some money. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Like, I mean, I was pretty fired up about this the other day. I can't remember if it was Connected or maybe it was App Store. I was listening to something and I'd already seen the stories. I'd read what you guys had put up on Mac Stories and then I was listening again and I was just found myself getting more and more angry. Like I genuinely annoyed with myself that I bought an Apple Watch like a month ago because right now I really don't want to give Apple any money. Like I'm
right.
It just doesn't feel like I don't know, they've always been a company. I'm not going to sit here and go, they're like, they care about people. They don't, they're a company and of course they want to make money. But it always felt like they were at least trying to do things that customers wanted and to do things for the benefit of the customers, even if ultimately they are just trying to make money, because of course they are.
Right.
But right now it kind of feels like, oh, yeah, so you're just like another massive company doing gross things to make as much money as possible and basically screw everybody on the way down.
Yeah. Well, and I think people hold Apple to a very high standard, and I think it's right to, because I think that they did have a reputation for that historically. And I think people sense that is slipping, which I think it is personally. And, one of those reputations was not only as the company that cares about your privacy, but it's also that they're the company that cares about the creative arts. They care, the whole intersection of technology and the liberal arts, which was one of the slides Steve Jobs threw up, right, not too long before he passed away. And at least in terms of their business practices, I think that they've essentially abandoned that, especially when you see, this Patreon thing. I think that is pretty clearly not a focus for the company right now. And I think it does go back to the very origins of the App Store, because Apple fell into this whole casual gaming thing. And the whole idea of gems and coins and all this stuff and 100% profit margins on services, that all goes back to casual games in the early days of the App Store, like, circa 2009, the App Store came out in 2008. So, within a year, that stuff was starting. It took a while for the in-app purchase. I think that was either 2009 or 2010, but I think that they saw that as an opportunity, and coins became subscriptions, and then they started looking around and looking for other places where they could extract value through commerce that was happening one way or another through the phone. And what we're getting is this, it really does feel like a tax now. It feels like a toll that anyone has to pay for the convenience of doing business on a phone. So one of the things I found kind of interesting about Patreon is I've actually never really used the Patreon iOS app. I don't know why it is. Whenever I've joined a Patreon, I've always done it on the web for whatever reason. Maybe that was just going back because I was using Patreon very early, and maybe they didn't have an app back then, and I just kind of stuck with the web. But now you've got people who are going to actively tell their membership members not to use the iOS app, which I think in the long run, that can't be good for Apple either.
Yeah, no, it definitely can't. I mean, if this way, I don't really have a sense of who, as an example, who's the MKBHD of Patreon, who's got millions of subscribers or whatever. But you're absolutely right that, like, it's only going to take, a few of these sort of high profile people that use Patreon to start saying, oh, but also don't use your iPhone, because otherwise, right, you've got to pay 30% more, or I as the creator get less money depending on what they've picked. This whole thing it's just so frustrating. I wish, I don't know what I wish. The ideal scenario would be that Apple just competes on its merits, and if their payment system was so good, Patreon would be falling over themselves to use it. But they're not, because 30% is, we can argue whether that's reasonable for a developer selling an app. Like, I think that's a separate conversation. But essentially, Apple are saying, we're going to charge you 30% for payment processing, and they're not, and the payments aren't even going through Apple. It's literally just, oh, you're on our platform, so you're charging 30%. There's no reasonable scenario where, even if Patreon were using Apple systems, there's no reasonable scenario where 30% makes sense.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that seems most unfair to me about this situation, was that Patreon was allowed to use their own payment processing for years on iOS. Apple didn't push this for years and years and years. And, I guess to a degree, to Apple's credit, this is a go forward thing. This is going to apply with signups starting in November going forward, not to anything that currently exists. But it doesn't make it any better, especially in the sense that, first of all, not only did Patreon kind of base their entire business structure around the fact that Apple was letting them use their own payment system, but so did the creators who have Patreon memberships that they're selling. And not only that, but Patreon offers memberships that Apple doesn't through its in-app purchases. Things like pay per creation, like somebody has a podcast and you only pay when an episode is produced, or someone, has a comic, like a web comic, and they only get paid when the web comic is published, that sort of thing. And some of the timing of some of the payments, those things don't exist in the same way they do on iOS. And so that changes, even if creators stick with it, it changes the way they have to do business, and it might not fit with the kind of content that they're creating. So it's a real shame to see. I mean, I think, especially given how long Patreon was allowed to continue to do their own thing, they should continue to be allowed to do their own thing, and companies like them should be able to continue to do a similar type of thing. I mean, I don't think there are big Patreon players. There are definitely people making lots of money on Patreon, but it's like anything on the web. That's a pretty small subset of people. Most people on Patreon are not making a ton of money. Patreon's charging them roughly, I think it's 8%. And now that 30% would go on top of that. So you're looking at like almost nearly 40% markup to whatever they happen to be offering. And I don't know. I think that would just like crush the demand for some of these creators out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what a weird situation to be in, that, you know, I have to assume at least a few people at Patreon are going, oh, actually, it was a mistake to make an iOS app. Like, nobody, you know, because I can imagine a scenario where they'd pushed all their efforts into making like just a web app that runs in Safari, or you could save to your home screen. Like, there shouldn't be a scenario where a company that's been running for years absolutely fine all of a sudden is looking at this going, hang on a minute, if we didn't have an iOS app, we wouldn't have any of these problems.
Right. And now, I mean, after all these years, it's just not a practical solution to say, oh, we're going to get rid of our iOS app and just send people to the web. That's just not practical to do after it's been around for so long, and you would just lose too many customers that way, I think.
But yeah, and at this point, it is also using, you know, some native features, because it has podcasts in there and stuff like that. And I think it has automatic downloads. You know, it essentially functions like a micro podcast client. So it's not like they're not using the features of the platform. So they, like you say, you can't just get rid of it. It just doesn't make any sense. And then, you know, Apple have, you know, clearly this is a conversation they've been having for a while with Apple, but it just, the whole thing just feels gross.
Well, it does make me wonder a little bit about things like, for instance, does Apple at some point go to Marco Arment and say, you know, Overcast, you are allowing people to access paid podcasts on your podcast app. We want 30% of those revenues, even though he's not the one charging them. I would think the answer to that is probably no, because of that he's not a middleman, so to speak, in that transaction the way that Patreon is. But you do wonder how far this reaching goes at this point.
Well, I did see, and I'll try and dig it out for the show notes. I saw a thread of Toots go past on Mastodon, and a developer had made a VPN app that would spin up a digital...
Anders. That was Anders.
Yes, thank you.
Anders Borum, yeah.
Yeah. So this was an app that connected to DigitalOcean, and it would spin up a server as a VPN. You could use it, and then it would shut down afterwards, which obviously reduces cost and stuff like that, because you can pay per minute or hour or whatever on DigitalOcean.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never allowed in the App Store, because Apple basically said, well, either we need a cut of the payments, or if you can't take any money, this isn't allowed on the App Store. So that app is just, it doesn't exist. You know, it's gone.
And that sounded like such an incredibly clever app too. When I heard about that, when I saw that thread, I was like, oh man, I can't believe that he wasn't able to make that, because it seems like such a brilliant idea. I would never have thought to do such a thing. Anders is the developer behind Working Copy and
of course.
And Secure Shellfish. So he knows what he's doing, and he's made some great apps in the past, and that's one that I think would have been fantastic. I would have been all over that. But yeah, you're right. That's a very good example. And I don't mean to pick on Marco. I mean, the same would be true whether you're using Pocket Cast or Castro or whatever. They all allow you to use these, allow you to subscribe to private podcast feeds. Now, the fact that those are all based on open web standards using RSS would make that particularly difficult for Apple to try to do, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they're money grabbing, let's call it what it is. It's money grabbing, you know, rent seeking, whatever you want to call it,
right.
is stifling innovative apps can't be on the App Store if they don't have a business model where Apple can take money for it. And that just, again, it just puts a bad taste in my mouth. I can't, I really, well, I feel like at this point, the only thing we're going to see is governments are going to step in even more than we've already seen in, in like the EU and things like that.
Right.
But, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and, you might say Anders should just release his app in the EU because he could do that in AltStore, for instance, or one of the other alternative app marketplaces. And it's true. I think he could do that. I don't know if, I think that that's a solution. I don't know if it's the best solution I just don't know whether that, you'd have to really analyze it to see whether there was a viable thing to limit yourself just the EU countries. Not that the EU countries are small by any stretch of the imagination, but, it's a big difference between the EU and worldwide. So who knows?
Yeah, definitely. I have a little bonus extra thing for the end of the show. That's not
nice.
in the notes. So I passed my driving test today, and I was, my dad phoned my dad. Yeah, I did it. My dad phoned me to, say congratulations and talk about a few other bits. And then he said, I had texted him and said, "Oh yeah, I'm free whenever you want." And he said, "Give me a couple of minutes." And when he phoned, he said, "I had to pause you and John." I said, "What?" So I have mentioned the podcast before. Obviously, we've been doing this for 9 years nearly. I think actually 9 years today. But for whatever reason, it's never really crossed his radar that I've mentioned it. The other day when he was here, he found it, subscribed, and then you probably saw on Mastodon, he texted me some feedback for episode 186, which is a few episodes back.
Mm-hmm.
Today, he's started at the beginning from episode 1.
Goodness.
He said the episode he was on, I had just got my iPhone 6 and you had got your 6 Plus.
Wow.
To give you some sense of how long it is ago. So, I guess, hi Dad, you're listening whenever you get to this one.
It's going to be a while, but good on you. Oh, wow. Yeah, there's a lot of nonsense in those early episodes. Mm-hmm. I think there's still a lot of nonsense now, but I don't even remember what kind of nonsense it was 9 years ago. But that's quite that's some good work to go back and listen to 9 years. That's a lot of episodes.
He might be the only person that's done that. I think. I'm sure there's people who've listened from the beginning. And I'm sure that we've had new people join, but I can't imagine anybody's gone back to episode 1.
Well, I think he heard about listener Debbie, my sister-in-law, and wants to become the new number one relation listen to our show. I don't know, all in the family.
Absolutely. Well, let's leave it there then, I think.
All right, sounds good. I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks, Rob.
All right, speak to you later.